If you want your child not just to survive secondary school, but thrive there, I've got 5 key lessons that they need to know. Secondary school can be a really daunting place, and that step from primary to secondary is the biggest in a young person's life. So helping them to navigate that time in their life is super important and crucial really for how they feel as they get older. All that change, all those new people, those new faces, those new places, all that fitting in and all that peer and social pressure, there's a lot to navigate for such a young person. But if they work towards these 5 areas, then they'll live their secondary school life feeling secure and self-confident. So number 1 is help them discover their true values, their life values. So what values resonate with them? This could be kindness or courage, creativity, determination, hard work, honesty. There's hundreds of different values for them to pick from. But if you help them to select their values, then it's going to really help them navigate situations that come up in secondary school. Finding the values that matter to them is extremely valuable. These will work as a guide towards how they should behave so that they do feel happy and fulfilled during their time at school. To help them find these, you could just simply ask them, which of these values resonate with you and why? Or which of these values is important to you? And then to help them stick to those, you can just simply ask them, how are you going to show these values today? Or how are you going to show, and then select a value, how are you going to show that today? There's going to be many times in secondary school where they'll be in a situation, or a situation will come up that goes against their values. So for instance, if they picked kindness and they see someone being unkind or one of their friends being unkind to someone else, this is going to go against their values. Now, what we would want them to do and what you would want them to do is to stick to their values and be the best type of person they can be. So helping them to identify these values in the first place and then reminding them how to stick to them is really important when it comes to secondary school and growing up. Because remember, if they practice these values through school, then they're going to show them in later life. It also works the same way if they pick a trait or a value that isn't very helpful and they practice this through secondary school, they're going to take it into later life too. Number 2 is linked to number 1, and it is to help them to understand what internal or intrinsic motivation is. So help them to see how they can motivate themselves towards their internal motivations. And this would be to do with making themselves happy. Maybe it's because they're seeing their friends that make them happy, or they're making new friends which make them happy. Maybe it makes them feel proud or fulfilled because they're doing hard work or trying a new challenge, like going somewhere new, or maybe it improves them as a person. So they're developing traits or they're developing new learning by going there. This is the more internal motivation that you want them to try and focus on. Now, this can be really hard. Nowadays, there are so many external influences. There's not just the teachers at the school, there's the other children at the school. There's also the social pressure or the peer pressure that comes with friendships, and there's pressure that comes online too. There's loads of external influence on young people these days. So helping them to navigate this and find the internal motivation and stick to their intrinsic motivation is extremely beneficial. And the reason this ties in to their values is because if they're working towards their values, then they are working towards internal motivation. Number 3 is that they are, and they always will be, a work in progress. I have never met an adult who isn't a work in progress. However, children and teenagers that age in secondary school are constantly comparing themselves to other people. They're constantly thinking about how they could be better rather than focusing on how good they are now. And that can be really hard for someone that age, to constantly compare themselves to someone else who they see as being better than them in some way can knock their confidence massively. So helping them to notice that they are actually a work in progress and to focus on how much better they are now compared to maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, maybe even a week ago, that's going to be really helpful for them. Schools are constantly pushing children to do better. Of course, why wouldn't we? We want them to improve, but this can knock their self-worth sometimes if they're constantly thinking they need to improve. So helping them to see how far they've actually come is a really good way of building up their self-confidence and their self-esteem. Number 4 is to help them deal with limiting beliefs. Now, a limiting belief is a belief that will hold them back in some way. Everyone gets limiting beliefs, even adults. But these can hold children back quite a lot. And if they're not dealt with at the time, or if children aren't shown how to deal with these, then these can change their life forever. If they are held back by a limiting belief in school and they stop themselves from doing something, then that's going to feed into their later life too. For example, if they wanted to try out for the school play, but they had a limiting belief that they weren't very good at singing and they never would be, or they'd never be good at performing, and they didn't go for that play, they didn't go for that audition, this then could change how their secondary school life actually pans out, and maybe how their future life pans out too. So helping them to deal with limiting beliefs and change these into empowering beliefs instead is really important for helping them live their best life in secondary school. Now, one good way of doing this is by helping them to put these limiting beliefs on trial. I like to call it putting them on trial. We don't want these limiting beliefs, we need to change them. So if we put these limiting beliefs on trial and we disprove them, so we write down all the reasons why that limiting belief simply isn't true, then it'll help the child feel better about that situation and actually push themselves to do it. And number 5 is to identify their controllables and control their controllables. Now, this is a massive point. If a young person is able to identify their controllables, and more importantly, everything that's out of their control, then they're going to feel a whole lot better about situations that they find hard. If someone can identify everything that is out of their control, they'll soon realise that about 90% of life is completely out of their control. Now, if it's completely out of their control, then no amount of thinking about it, no amount of acting towards it or trying to change it will change it. So we need to forget about it. We can only really control 10% of things. That is all to do with ourselves. So they'll quickly realise that they can only control what they say and what they do, how they behave, how they act. They cannot control how other people behave, what other people say, or certain situations. If they are able to identify their controllables and notice that the only thing they can really control is themselves, then it will help to take the pressure off, not just of schoolwork, but peer pressure too. They can't control what other people say or how other people act. They can't control the work they're given or how hard the work is. But what they can control is what they say back to people. What they can control is how they behave. What they can control is how hard they work and how much effort they put in. And that's what they need to notice. If you help them to notice this, then they will navigate secondary school a whole lot easier than a lot of people do. Certainly a lot easier than I did. One good strategy to use to do this is just to get them to write down everything they have no control over in secondary school and everything they have full control over in secondary school. And then everything they have kind of some control or influence over in secondary school. Some examples they might have in the no control would be what other people say, how other people behave, the work they're given, what teachers they have, what time they have to go to school, what time the lessons are, what time lunchtime is, all that kind of stuff. There's hundreds of things that they cannot control. Some things they might have some control or influence over is what people say to them, and that might be because they've asked them a question. How other people feel, because they might actually be able to help how someone feels, or actually you might be the opposite and make them feel bad. Some things they might have in the full control are how they behave, what they say, what they do, how hard they work, how much time they spend doing something. Once they've done this and they've written down lots of ideas that go in each of them, then get them just to cross off everything they've put in the no control and some control or influence, because they can't control these and no amount of worrying about it will change that. Then they'll just focus on the controllables. Now that is easier said than done. There's obviously going to be times where they're going to be thinking about the things they cannot control. So you might have to remind them to do this task again or do that strategy again so that they shift their attention back to their controllables and control their controllables. If your child masters those 5 things, then they will thrive in secondary school. I have a quick question though. Does your child struggle to stay motivated or push themselves to do their best? Or are they held back by their low self-confidence? If so, I've created this free ebook for you. Click the link in the description below to grab your copy. Anyway, I'll be posting plenty more content like this so that you can support your child. So make sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss out.